In the quiet corridors of power, where justice is meant to reign, a secret was unfolding. A high-ranking sheriff, entrusted with upholding the law, was about to become its greatest betrayer. Keith Atkinson, a man who sat in judgment over his fellow officers, a man who held their futures in his hands. But behind the polished badge, behind the crisp uniform, lay something far more sinister. It began with a whisper, a rumor of impropriety, a moment of weakness in the dim solitude of his office. But what should have remained a secret turned into something far worse, a scandal that threatened to shake the very foundations of the department. A desperate man, a forbidden affair, and a cover-up so reckless it would end in nothing short of humiliation. But Atkinson was not just any officer. He was the investigator, the enforcer, the one who decided the fate of others. And now his own fate was about to be sealed. He is in a dire position to make a choice that would not only expose his own misdeeds, but unravel the very system he had sworn to protect. This is a story of power, corruption, and the devastating fall of a man who believed he was untouchable. Keith Atkinson, a name once spoken with authority, a figure who commanded respect, a man entrusted with the delicate task of upholding integrity within law enforcement. As a lieutenant in the Kern County Sheriff's Office, Atkinson's position was one of influence. He did not simply enforce the law, he scrutinized those who did. He sat in rooms where careers were decided, where accusations were weighed, and where the lines between guilt and innocence were drawn. For years, Atkinson oversaw internal affairs, the very division responsible for investigating misconduct among deputies. His word held power. A single ruling from his office could mean the difference between a badge and disgrace. When an officer was suspected of wrongdoing, it was Atkinson's job to ensure justice was served, to interrogate, to uncover the truth. And for many in the department, his presence alone was enough to invoke fear, a man whose judgment could end a career. But the balance of power is a delicate thing. The same authority that grants the ability to punish can also conceal wrongdoing. The same voice that condemns can one day stand accused. For Atkinson, a man so familiar with the failings of others, there was an unspoken confidence, a belief that he understood the rules well enough to bend them, that he knew the limits of investigation well enough to evade it. For years, his name carried weight inside the walls of the Kern County Sheriff's Office. He was respected, trusted, and in many ways, untouchable. Officers who stepped into his office sat stiff-backed in their chairs, watching his every move, waiting for the inevitable moment when he would decide their fate. But now, the chair had been turned, the roles had reversed, and the investigator had become the investigated. It is a rare thing to witness the fall of a man who once held the power to pass judgment, a man who spent years dissecting the lies of others, only to find himself constructing his own, a man who had demanded accountability, now forced to answer for his own actions. It is a quiet night in Kern County. The halls of the sheriff's office are still, save for the distant murmur of radio chatter. The clock inches towards the late hours of a November weekend in 2021. While most deputies are out in the field, responding to calls, patrolling the highways, and keeping the peace, one man remains inside his office, alone as the day turned out to be. Keith Atkinson, a lieutenant, a leader, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the entire county at this moment. The man responsible for ensuring that discipline is maintained, that integrity is upheld. The man who for years has judged the actions of others. But tonight, he is not reviewing reports. He is not discussing protocol. He is not conducting an investigation. Tonight, the investigator is making a choice that will set in motion a chain of events he cannot control. A woman steps into his office. She is not just another employee. She is a subordinate, a civilian working within the department, a woman who reports directly to him. A woman who, outside these walls, is engaged to another sheriff's deputy. She should not be here. He should not be here, like this. But the door closes, and what follows will leave a stain on his career that not even his years of authority can erase. The encounter lasts minutes, perhaps an hour. The precise details remain known only to them. But what is certain is this: the affair, once hidden in whispers, will soon be spoken in courtrooms, written in official reports, and dissected by those he once commanded. Atkinson does not leave his post. His radio remains on, his phone within reach. He will later defend himself with these facts. I had my radio on. I had my phones on. I was available. But availability is not accountability. And presence does not equal responsibility. Because at this moment, the highest ranking law enforcement officer in Kern County is not responding to emergencies. He is not reviewing case files. He is not leading. He is risking everything. He does not yet know that things are about to get worse. That this moment, a decision made behind closed doors, will become the first of many he will regret. For now, the building is silent. No one has knocked. No one has entered. But secrets cannot be contained forever. The woman leaves. The office door shuts once more, and Atkinson remains behind his desk, unaware that the past hour of his life will one day be reduced to a single question. Was it worth it? Time moves forward. The night ends. The weekend passes. And for a brief moment, it seems the encounter will remain undiscovered. But then something happens. An accusation, a separate case, a different man. A detective sergeant within Atkinson's own division finds himself at the center of a sexual misconduct investigation. It has nothing to do with Atkinson, at least not yet. The woman, the same woman, files a complaint. The details remain unclear, the allegations serious. An investigation is opened. The department moves swiftly. Internal Affairs begins its review. Witnesses are identified. Statements are taken. Atkinson is not concerned. He is, after all, the one who oversees these investigations, the one who ensures that truth is uncovered. But truth is never selective. And this time, the investigation does not stop where he expects. It expands. The accused detective sergeant sits across from the investigators. He is asked about the allegations against him. He is pressed for details, expected to defend himself. And he does, but not in the way they anticipated. He denies wrongdoing. He calls the woman unstable, reckless, unpredictable, and then he shifts the focus away from himself. He speaks of another man, a man whose name carries weight, a man who should not have been in the office with her that night, a man who thought no one would ever know, Keith Atkinson. And in that instant, the scope of the investigation changes. The focus shifts. Atkinson is no longer on the outside looking in. He is inside, standing in the very place he once put others. The woman is questioned again. She does not deny it. She does not attempt to conceal the truth. Yes, she had an encounter with Atkinson. Yes, it happened in his office. Yes, he was on duty. Yes, he was her superior. The facts are laid out, piece by piece, forming a picture that cannot be ignored. Atkinson is now facing the very process he once controlled. The same questions he asked others are now being asked of him. He does what any man in his position would do. He defends himself. He explains. He downplays. I had my radio on. I had my phones on. I was available. But availability is not innocence, and excuses are not absolution. The investigators listen, they nod, they take notes. But there is a siege now, because while the encounter itself is damning, it is not the most serious offense. What comes next will be. The realization is slow, creeping in as Atkinson understands the weight of what he has done. An affair alone is enough to end a career. But a cover-up, a deliberate act of obstruction, that is something far worse. Because now, Atkinson knows the investigation will not stop with a simple reprimand. It will not end with a private conversation or a quiet departure. They will look deeper. They will dig further. They will find things he does not want them to find. He does not wait. He takes action. Text messages, deleted. Call logs, erased. Evidence that could link him to the woman, gone. For years, he has watched others make mistakes. He has documented their failures. He has seen what happens to those who leave behind a trail, and he will not be one of them, or so he believes. But no deletion is ever truly complete. No erasure is absolute. Investigators notice the missing records. And suddenly, Atkinson is not just a man who made a mistake. He is a man who tried to cover it up. And in the eyes of the department, that is an offense far worse than the one he was trying to hide. The investigation is no longer about an affair. It is about obstruction. It is about integrity. It is about whether a man who was once trusted to judge others can be trusted at all. For Atkinson, the questions are no longer about one night in November. They are about everything that followed, the choices he made, the actions he took, and the consequences that will come next. Because for the first time in his career, Atkinson is no longer the one asking the questions. He is the one struggling to find the answers, and the truth is fast coming to limelight. A complaint, a name, a new investigation begins. It starts, as these things often do, with a statement. A woman walks into internal affairs, her words measured, her accusations serious. She speaks of a night with a detective sergeant, an encounter she claims was not consensual, a superior officer, a man in a position of power, a woman caught in a situation she did not ask for. Internal affairs moves quickly. The process is methodical. The detective sergeant is called in, questioned under the same rules that have governed investigations for years. He is given an opportunity to explain, to respond, to defend himself. But he does something no one expects. He does not deny outright. He does not simply push back against the accusations. He redirects. He shifts the spotlight. He names another man, not just any man, Keith Atkinson. He does not speak in hushed tones. He does not hesitate. He lays it out clearly. The woman accusing him, he claims, is unstable. She is reckless. She has a history of entanglements. And he knows this because he has seen it before. He knows about her past. He knows about her affair. And he knows exactly who she was with. The words hang in the air. A name now spoken aloud. A connection now exposed. Keith Atkinson, the investigator, the enforcer, now the accused. For internal affairs, it is an unexpected turn. A case meant to focus on one officer now demands another investigation entirely. A man who was supposed to be watching over these cases is yet again now part of another one. The questions change. The investigation expands. Atkinson is no longer just a name in the background. He is the subject. The accused detective sergeant leans back in his chair, watching their reaction. The woman, he claims, had an affair with Atkinson, and not just anywhere, not in private, not in secrecy, inside the sheriff's office, inside his office, while on duty. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. He is certain of it. The investigation that was supposed to be about him now has a second focus, a new direction, a name they did not expect to be examining again, Keith Atkinson. And now, Internal Affairs has no choice. They must go back. The woman is questioned again. This time, the inquiry is different. This time, the questions are not just about the detective sergeant. They are about something else, something that was never meant to be uncovered. And this time, the investigators do not just listen. They press. They compare. They look for inconsistencies, and they find them. The woman does not deny the affair, but the details are different now. The way she tells the story has changed. What was once described as a moment of intimacy becomes a moment of uncertainty. What was once a decision, she now hesitates to define. And when asked about what followed, the deletions, the missing messages, the interference, she does not have clear answers. Her hesitation is enough. It is enough to warrant another round of questions. Not for her, for him. Keith Atkinson. He is no longer leading an investigation. He is no longer deciding someone else's fate. He is sitting in the same seat where so many before him have sat. And now he must explain. He must defend. He must account for what has been revealed. He is asked about the night in question. He does not deny it. He is asked about his role as a superior officer. He acknowledges it. But when the conversation turns to something more serious, when the questions move from an affair to the act of covering it up, his answers change. There are gaps. There are pauses. There are things he cannot explain. The messages, the missing records, the deleted call logs. He hesitates, but the investigation does not. Internal Affairs now has more than an affair. They have evidence of obstruction again. They have the deliberate deletion of messages. They have the erasure of phone logs. And they have one final fact. Atkinson was not just any officer. He was Internal Affairs. He knew how these cases worked. He knew what investigators would look for, and he knew exactly what to remove. But knowledge is not enough, because even the most carefully deleted information leaves a trace. And now, Atkinson is left with a reality he cannot control. The questions will not stop. The investigation will not be dismissed. The accusations will not fade away. Because the moment the detective sergeant spoke his name, the moment the woman's story changed, the moment the missing messages were discovered, everything fell apart. The weight of his decisions is now inescapable. Keith Atkinson is no longer the man who decides. He is the man who waits, the man who faces judgment. And for the first time in his career, he is the one with something to lose, the one with no control. the one waiting for the inevitable outcome. Because this investigation is no longer about what happened that night, it is about what followed. And what follows will be the end. The weight of an investigation is unlike anything else. For those on the outside, it is a matter of rules and procedures, a mechanical process that simply unfolds. But for the man under scrutiny, it is suffocating. A presence that follows every step, a shadow that looms over each word spoken, each action taken. Keith Atkinson knew this better than anyone. He had been the investigator, the enforcer, the man who ensured that when an officer crossed the line, there was no escape. He had spent years reviewing cases, uncovering details, following trails of evidence left behind by those who believed they could avoid detection. Now the system he once commanded was closing in on him. The process is swift. Investigations often take months, sometimes even years, tangled in bureaucracy, hindered by technicalities. But not this time. The evidence is irrefutable. The choices Atkinson made, each one deliberate, each one calculated, now stand as a testimony to his downfall. For those within the department, there is no debate. The Kern County Sheriff's Office has no room for hesitation. And at the helm of this decision stands one man, Sheriff Donnie Youngblood. For years, Youngblood has seen officers come and go, careers rise and fall. But this is different. This is not a deputy caught in a moment of weakness. This is not a simple lapse in judgment. This is the man who once judged others, the man who sat at the head of internal affairs, the man entrusted with ensuring discipline and integrity. And now that very man has failed the system he once protected. The response is decisive, inexcusable. A single word, spoken with the weight of finality. A word that will follow Atkinson for the rest of his life. The termination is immediate. There is no quiet resignation, no opportunity to step away with dignity. Atkinson is fired. His name, once spoken with authority, is now a warning tale within the department. A name that once carried weight now carries shame. But this is only the beginning, because the sheriff's decision is not the final blow. There is another institution, one with power that extends far beyond the walls of the Kern County Sheriff's Office, the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, POST. For any law enforcement officer in California, POST certification is everything. It is not just a title, not just a requirement. It is the key to a career. Without it, there is no badge. There is no gun. There is no return to the field. And now POST is watching. They have reviewed the case, they have seen the evidence, and their decision is clear. Atkinson is to be decertified permanently. This is not a suspension. This is not a revocation that comes with conditions. There will be no appeal, no second chance. Atkinson's career in law enforcement is over. His name is entered into the National Decertification Index, a record that follows officers who have been stripped of their credentials. It means that even outside California, even in another state, the stain of this decision will remain. No police department will take him. No sheriff's office will welcome him. No agency will issue him another badge. Atkinson is no longer a peace officer, and he never will be again. For most, this would be the end. A career built over decades, erased. A reputation once formidable, shattered. The finality of it is absolute, or so it should have been. Because what happens next is what no one expected. Despite everything, despite the investigation, the firing, the public disgrace, Keith Atkinson finds another job. Not just anywhere, but within the very system that removed him. The Kern County District Attorney's Office, a place where law is upheld, where justice is pursued, where those accused of wrongdoing face judgment. And now a man who was deemed unfit to serve as a peace officer is working among them. His title, investigative specialist. It is not a badge. It is not a sworn officer's role, but it is a position of power, a position that raises questions, because a man who has been stripped of his credentials, a man who has lost the right to carry a badge, should he still have access to investigations? Should he still have influence over the legal system? Many ask, few answer. The district attorney, Cynthia Zimmer, remains silent. Requests for comment are ignored. The decision is not explained. And so the public is left with questions. How does a disgraced officer still find work in law enforcement? How does a man who has lost his authority still hold a position of influence? Some will say it is the way the system works. That power, once earned, does not easily fade. That connections, once formed, remain. but others will say it is something else entirely. That even in disgrace, even in the face of undeniable failure, there are those who will protect their own. Keith Atkinson is no longer a lieutenant. He is no longer a peace officer, but he is still employed. And for those who once trusted the system to correct its failures, it is an ending that does not feel like justice. It is a story that does not conclude as expected. Because for Atkinson, there is no prison sentence, no court ruling, no formal punishment beyond what the department has already done. And so, he remains, not as an officer, not as an investigator, but as a reminder of how easily the lines can blur, of how quickly power can shift, of how, in the world of law enforcement, a fall from grace does not always mean a fall from power. The case of Keith Atkinson is not just the story of a fallen officer. It is not just the story of a man who made mistakes, who erased records, who lost his badge. It is something much larger. It is a story about power, about the way the system protects its own, and about how, even in disgrace, some men still walk away with their influence intact. Atkinson has lost all of that. His name now sits in the National Decertification Index, a database designed to track officers who have been removed for misconduct. A warning system, a way to ensure that those who have violated the public trust cannot simply move to another department, another city, another state, to continue their careers unnoticed. Atkinson is one of them now, a name on a list, a former officer who can never be one again. But was this list truly accomplished if some can still find their way back into the system? Atkinson is not a unique case. In every corner of the country, names appear on that same index, officers who have been removed, who have been investigated, who have been deemed unfit to serve. And yet some of them remain within law enforcement agencies, not in uniform, not in patrol cars, but in advisory roles, in training departments, in legal offices, still close enough to the system to influence it, still given access, still trusted. The public sees cases like Atkinson's and asks the same question. How does a man who has been stripped of his credentials still find work within the justice system? For many, the answer is simple. It is the way the system has always worked. A system where loyalty outweighs accountability, where consequences, though severe, are not always permanent, and where a name, once powerful, is rarely erased entirely. In the days following Atkinson's termination, the case spreads beyond Kern County. It is no longer a local story. It is a headline. It is a point of outrage. Social media erupts. Screens flash with disbelief, with anger, with frustration. A cop caught deleting evidence gets another job? Of course he does. Imagine if this was a regular citizen. They'd be in jail. This is why people don't trust the system. The comments flood in. The news outlets pick up the story. The cycle begins again. For some, this is just another example, another story in a long history of officers who have abused their power. For others, it is something more, a warning, a reminder that in law enforcement, the rules are not always the same for everyone, and that even when the system removes one of its own, there are still places where they land. Atkinson has lost his badge. He will never wear a uniform again. But the truth is, he never really left. Because power once held is not so easily taken away. It lingers, it remains, and as long as there are those willing to look the other way, it finds a way to survive. And so, we ask you, should Keith Atkinson still be working in law enforcement? Should a man who erased evidence, who interfered with an investigation, who was fired for misconduct, still hold any position of power within the justice system? Tell us what you think. Leave a comment below. And if you want more stories like this, stories of corruption, scandal, and the hidden flaws within the justice system, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we uncover the truths that others try to hide.